Hey there, it's Mitzi. Welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about the books I've been reading this past week, give you just a little update. I'm going to try to do this more often because I have tried since starting BookTube to do it different ways, like wait to the end of the month and do reading updates, do a mid-month. I've done it all different kind of ways. And right now this just feels to me it's the easiest way to do it. It just feels more natural to just talk to you about the books as I go along. So I'm going to try to do that. I'm not promising that that's the way it's going to go, but right now this just feels like the best way to do it. So I'm just going to, as we go, and I'm trying to catch up because if you follow my channel, you know there were several weeks I wasn't able to film anything because of things going on here. And so I just feel a little antsy about my reading right now, and I'm trying to get back into the flow of things here. So just bear with me. So today I'm just going to talk about the books that I've read over the past week. So the first book I want to talk about is Land of Silence by Tessa Afshar. This was a book that I was almost finished with, I think, the last time I updated you. This was a book that I read for Jane Reads, Jeanette over at Jane Reads. She has this little challenge for Christian fiction, and every month she has a little prompt. And the prompt for April was a new to you author. And so for me, this was a new to me author. I've never read anything by this author, and this won't be the last because I really enjoyed this. I'm not going to tell you who this is about. You can read the back and find out, but I went into this blind. I did not know who this was about. In the beginning, I just thought that it was based around biblical times the way it started. I thought, okay, this is going to bring in some biblical characters at a distance, but it didn't do that. It was closer and closer. The more I read, the further I went through the book, the closer those characters became, and one of them is actually a famous biblical character from the Bible. And so I did enjoy that. I thought that this was a great way to imagine what it was like during those times. And I'm not going to tell you who it was because I experienced it blind, and I think I enjoyed it more because of that. I don't know that I would have enjoyed it so much. I would have enjoyed it, but I think that the surprise for me as we went along before I read the back helped me just be more excited about how this was going to play out. I don't know if that makes sense, but anyway, I'm not going to tell you, but you can read the back of this book and find out. But if you don't want to know, just pick it up and start reading. But it is biblically based on a certain character. Of course, they take a lot of liberties on imagining what life was like. But this author, Tessa Afshar, is a great author. I was invested in the story from the beginning. There is a romance in this story. There are a lot of inspirational things that happen that are faith-based that I really enjoyed about it too. You know, sometimes, Christian fiction can be kind of funny because sometimes there will be one little scripture and then, it could be a secular book when you read it. You know what I mean? But this one was full of faith, and I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it. If you've read any more by this author, let me know. If you enjoyed it, let me know, because I do want to read more by this author. And I'm so glad too that Jeanette over at Jane Reads is hosting this challenge, because it prompts me to pick up some of these books. I have tons of these kinds of books on my shelf that I have not read yet, and so I was excited to pick this one up. Okay, now these are the books that were just spur of the moment mood reads for sure. After reading that, I had a whole stack of books that I was supposed to be reading. I have, I do a TBR every month, and I had these books that, because I'm behind on books that I was supposed to be reading since January. Seriously, I'm that far behind with some of the books. And I just ignored that stack completely, and I went to my shelf and I picked up a D.E. Stevenson because I was just in the mood for a D.E. Stevenson. And so I picked up Victoria Cottage. This was so great, which I love D.E. Stevenson. It's just light, reading for me. And they're all set in these sweet little villages with these sweet little people, and there's always, problems, and there's some kind of struggle within the story, but they're just encouraging, heartwarming kind of stories, or that's what I find when I read a D.E. Stevenson. And so I read this one. I had already read the last book in this trilogy. This is a trilogy. I had read the last book. I'd received it for Christmas a couple of years ago, I guess. And I read it in the winter because it's called Winter and Rough Weather. And so I'd read this one and I loved it. Well, what was so neat about it was when I picked this up, I knew the characters in this one already, of course. So thankfully it didn't ruin anything for me, because each one of the books in this trilogy, it's really set totally different in each one. Now, two of them, they're set in the same place, but this one starts out in somewhere separate, but they're kin to the people in the other books, if that makes sense. It's all family that go from place to place. I guess that makes sense. Sometimes this stuff sounds better in my head than when I say it. So anyway, this was really good. I enjoyed the characters in this one. I did notice the characters, remember them from the book that I'd read a couple of years ago, and I thought, oh, they're coming. I already know about them. So I loved this one so much that I ended up picking up the second one, because I already had it on my shelf, Music in the Hills, and I loved this one even better. Now, I did love the main character in this story. It's the mother, and then this one is James, her son's story. And then there is, well, I don't want to say too much, but another main person for these two is the main story of this one. So anyway, I really enjoyed them, but this one was my favorite, Music in the Hills. I loved James. I completely fell in love with this character. I loved just the way that he moves in this one. He's introduced in this story, and then he moves in with his aunt and uncle to learn about farming in this one. And his relationship with his aunt and uncle are just wonderful. His relationship with other people in the area. There's also this mystery that's going on. It's not a mystery per se, but there is a little mystery in the story. They're trying to figure out what's going on. And so there's a problem, and it's solved in the story. And I just fell in love with this character. And I loved everyone else in the book, and I already knew a couple of these characters, of course, because of Winter and Rough Weather. So having this little background to prepare me for this one was even better. But I'm not going to read this one right now because I got too many others, but I do plan on picking this back up, maybe in the winter, because there is a great blizzard scene in this one. So maybe in the winter I can pick it back up and just celebrate this trilogy, because it was really good. By the way, Winter and Rough Weather, I had found this book. It's called Shoulder the Sky. It's a beautiful book. I found this old vintage copy of this because I'm trying to collect D.E. Stevenson, and when I brought it home and opened it up, it's actually this story. So if you see Shoulder the Sky, it is Winter and Rough Weather. These are the same story, so don't get these confused. I don't know why they changed the names. They confused me. But anyway, I'm not sad that I picked this up because it's a beautiful vintage copy, and I am trying to collect a D.E. Stevenson. But I highly recommend this trilogy, and I love D.E. Stevenson. As I said before, I'm always in the mood for D.E. Stevenson. She's just a reliable author for me. And I know she's consistent. I just know what I'm going to get from her stories. I'm always satisfied at the end, and they're always heartwarming. It's just these beautiful characters and village life, which y'all know I love, in her story. So I'm glad that I read those. The next one I think I mentioned that I was going to read, and that is The Merchant of Venice. And I read it from this No Fear Shakespeare. I loved this. When I finished it, at first I was like, okay, that's it. I'm not too sure. I didn't feel like I was satisfied with the ending. I felt like I needed some resolution that wasn't there. But the more I think about it, the more that I love this one. Did I say it was Merchant of Venice? I guess I said that. But The Merchant of Venice was one I had never I never even heard anybody talk about it. I knew that, of course, The Merchant of Venice was one of Shakespeare's plays. I did know that. But I had never heard anything about the plot of this play. And so when I started it, it was definitely blind. I had no idea what to expect. But wow, this one is definitely a thought-provoking play. And it makes me just fall in love with Shakespeare even more. Because if you follow my channel, you know that I'm trying to journey through Shakespeare slowly. This year, I'm really trying to concentrate on reading at least 4 of his plays and reading more about the life of Shakespeare. And the more I read of Shakespeare, the more I love his work. And I think that the more I understand his work too. You know, it's just like reading older books. Like when I first started reading Victorian classics, I struggled in the beginning because the language is different and some of the terms I wasn't familiar with. But now when I pick up a Victorian classic, it's just as easy as reading modern classics because I am so familiar now with that world. And so as I read more of these plays, I'm getting more familiar with the way that he, turns his phrases and some of the vocabulary. So it is getting easier for me to read them, and I'm finding that I'm getting more out of them as I go. Now, the last one I read was Macbeth, and of course I knew about Macbeth pretty much because it's such a popular one, and I found that one to be super violent, but I did appreciate the story itself and, the meaning, the themes and things within that one. This one was so different, and when it first started, if you're not familiar with this one, it's about a man named Antonio who goes over and borrows money from this other man, Shylock. I think that's his name. And Shylock, well, Antonio is a Christian and Shylock is a Jew. And they are, of course, are at odds with each other. Ostracized, it's a big divide, which of course was happening during this time period. And so when he goes to ask for a loan from him, I was kind of surprised that Shylock would even accept, yes, I will give you the money. But when he tells him the terms of this loan, then you're like, okay, this is not going to end well. Because he tells him, he says, okay, I'm going to give you this loan, but if you can't pay me back, I get a pound of your flesh from your body, a pound of your flesh. So I knew then this was not going to this was not going to end well. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you any more about it except that it has some really interesting topics in it. The Christian-Jewish part was super interesting, and that was the part that I was not satisfied at the end because I struggled with how these characters accepted their fate, I guess. I don't know. I struggled with that. That's a big part of this. But what was really interesting was marriage in this. There are 3 different marriages that take place in this story, and they are super interesting. I'll just leave it at that. They're super interesting. Another thing that I found to be very interesting is there is sort of a heroine. There's a girl named Portia in this story, and I see her as like almost a savior in the story. And now, after reading this, I want to go back and look at all the women in the other plays I've read, and now I'm going to have a little radar on how he portrays women in each one of his stories. I want to do a whole study just on that because it was, I don't know, a surprise for me. Some of the things that take place in this story with Portia in particular. But anyway, this was thought-provoking. There are a lot of great themes in this. And there are some things at the end, like I say, the way it ended, I was like, oh, is that it? There's a certain character that kind of fades away. And I wanted him to come back and give me a little conversation on his thoughts on what had happened. So anyway, I highly recommend this. There's just a lot of themes in this, just like all the other plays that I've read. I also have a copy of The Taming of the Shrew, and I think I'm going to get it in this No Fear, because so far I've been reading them in this, and it's super easy. Just super easy, because I can look right over at the other page at Modern English, and I don't know, maybe I should try it since I'm getting used to the Shakespeare sort of the Shakespearean language. But I do have this one. I think this one is the last one I actually own. And so I will probably pick it up next just because I own it. And then I read Dr. Wordle's School by Anthony Trollope. And I'm so glad that I did, because this was just what I needed right now. It was not that long. It's a shorter Anthony Trollope. This is my third Anthony Trollope. It will not be my last. I have several others on my shelf, and I'm just chomping at the bit to get to them because this was so good. I think this is a great place to start if you've never read Victorian literature. So if you want to participate in Victober during October when we celebrate Victorian literature and you've never done it, write this title down and pick this up, because this read like something from today to me. I loved it. It was fast paced. It had great characters. There is a dilemma that's introduced in the beginning where Mr. and Mrs. Peacock moved to the area and Mr. Peacock works at the school. And then you find out that there is this scandal that revolves around Mr. and Mrs. Peacock, and the story goes from there, and it's about gossip and perception and standing up for what's right or wrong. There are a lot of great themes in this, but Anthony Trollope knows how to tell a great story with super interesting characters. That's what's so great about it. All these characters were just dynamic characters, and they were just super interesting. So I don't want to say too much about the scandal. You learn from the very beginning what the scandal is. That's what I found to be so interesting. It was, I think, chapter 3. This is something that I love about Anthony Trollope. He does this thing where, I don't know what it's called in literature, but I know like in movies it's called like breaking the fourth wall or something. Isn't that what it's called? He does that in his books. I'm trying to find... Okay, I found it. So at the very beginning of the story, he kind of steps out of the story to talk to the reader. And I just love that. He did that in another one that I read. But it says, "Oh, now, oh kind-hearted reader, I feel myself constrained in the telling of this little story to depart altogether from those principles of storytelling to which you probably have become accustomed, and to put the horse of my romance before the cart." And then at the very end he says, there is a mystery respecting Mr. and Mrs. Peacock. And then he goes on to say at the end of that chapter, he says, the mystery has at any rate been told, and they who feel that on this account all hope of interest is at an end had better put down the book. And then it went on from there. Well, of course, that just intrigued me even more, because it's like, okay, this is not about the scandal itself. The scandal is the scandal. But what plays out because of the scandal is what I'm trying to tell you. And so I just love that he was so upfront about that. It was, okay, this is not what this is about, but if you're still interested, let's continue. And I just found that to be so funny. I chuckled to myself when I read it. And I love how Anthony Trollope did that at the very beginning of this story. So there is a scandal, and then the story goes from there with how the people within this town handle the scandal. And one thing that I found to be super interesting is, to make matters worse, there's this paper, and it was Everybody's Business. I think that was the name of it, and I thought, okay, that's so typical. Let's have a gossip column and slander everybody. You know what I mean? So it was a really interesting story. I found it to be such a page turner, and I couldn't put it down. So I'm glad that I picked up another Anthony Trollope. Have you read any Anthony Trollope? Let me know in the comments if you have, and which book I should pick up next. I do have a couple of his on my shelf, and I plan on reading some of the bigger series that he has. But right now I'm trying to just read some of the standalones. So those are the books that I read this past week. A wonderful week of reading. I'm excited for what I'm reading this week. Right now I'm working on the Amish in April book that I had decided to read. I think it's called The Preacher's Daughter, and I'll let you know more about that on my next update. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.